Acts chapter 10 verses 34 to 43. We ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. Peter proceeded to speak and said, "You know what has happened all over Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John preached, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and power. He went about doing good and healing all those oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. We are witnesses of all that he did, both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. This man God raised on the third day and granted that he be visible, not to all the people, the witnesses chosen by God in advance, who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commissioned us to preach to the people and testify that he is the one appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. To him all the prophets bear witness, that everyone who believes in him will receive forgiveness of sins through his name." Caesarea is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea about 32 miles north of Joppa, which is the location of Peter's vision. Acts 10:10-15. He, Peter, was hungry and wished to eat, and while they were making preparations he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something resembling a large sheet coming down, lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all the earth's four-legged animals and reptiles and the birds of the sky. A voice said to him, "Get up, Peter, slaughter and eat." But Peter said, "Certainly not, sir. For never have I eaten anything profane and unclean." The voice spoke to him again, a second time, "What God has made clean, you are not to call profane." Why do you suppose Luke wrote about this vision? To a Jew, such as Peter, there were certain animals that were ritually unclean and thus could not be consumed. God was showing Peter that everything and everyone he created was clean and acceptable to him. This was an important lesson taught just in time. Little did Peter know that the very next day Cornelius, a Gentile, would send some of his Gentile men to Joppa to ask Peter to not only visit him in his home, but to eat and stay overnight with him. Had Peter not had the heavenly vision, he would have refused Cornelius' invitation because a devout Jew would have nothing to do with a Gentile. After Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven, the biggest problem that faced the growth of the church were the conflicts that existed between the Gentiles and Jews. Jesus' ministry was focused on the Jewish community. To be certain, he reached out to the Gentiles, but the Jews were his primary focus. This reading is a speech given by Peter, the leader of the church, to Cornelius and his family at their home in Caesarea. Cornelius was important, and in charge of 100 soldiers, thus he was a Roman centurion. It is reported in Acts 10 that he was a devout man, who believed in the God of Israel, and had been visited by an angel who instructed him, Acts chapter 10 verses 5-6. "Send men to Joppa, and bring one Simon who is called Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside." Why is it mentioned that Peter was staying with Simon the tanner? Don't know for sure, but there are possibly two reasons. First, God had already begun to prepare Peter to work with those outside the Orthodox Jewish community. You see, tanners were considered unclean because they worked with dead animal hides. Secondly, it is possible that on his own Peter had begun the process of evangelizing those who lived on the fringes of Jewish society. However, a visit and a stay with Cornelius, a Gentile, would be unthinkable for a devout Jew, but God had other plans. Acts chapter 10, verse 34 and 35, "And Peter opened his mouth and said, Truly I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him." By saying these words, Peter shows his acceptance, which will result in the baptism of all the men, women, children, and infants of Cornelius' household, and the welcoming of Gentiles into the church. We should not allow any form of discrimination to keep us from telling others about Christ. The self-righteous scream judgments against others, to hide the noise of skeletons dancing in their own closets. John Mark Green.